Hello and welcome to a brand new YouTube channel called Appalachian 4x4 Garage. My name is Brad and I am the co-owner of Appalachian 4x4 in Gray, Tennessee. So what we do here is we take Jeeps, modified or unmodified, and we do anything the customer desires. This is a pretty much brand new 06 Rubicon. It's got a lift, it's got some bumpers, so we are going to now throw a whole laundry list of new parts under it, including a new lift, body lift, front bumper, rear bumper, and whatever he desires. We've already put a set of brand new tires on it, and we're going to see what we can make happen. So now that we got the wheels and tires and it up in the air, I just wanted to showcase how pristine this Jeep really is. So usually TJs have a fair amount of rust in the frame. This thing has been garage kept since the first owner bought this thing brand new with 0 miles on it in 2006. The customer that we have is now the third owner of it, and this Jeep only has, like I said earlier, 26,000 miles on it. And of course, it's got a brand new lift on it, but the customer wanted a little bit different setup, so we're trying to accommodate what he wants. The first owner, first thing, actually did this Jeep a favor and completely undercoated the entire underside of this Jeep. And the crazy thing is, no oil leaks. Cut to that big laundry list I mentioned earlier. We have a couple goodies for this customer. So we've got 7 Blacksmith's rock sliders. He's already got another Jeep that we put these on, and he really likes them. But we also have a house brand slider that we build, and we're usually pricing anywhere from $450 to $500 a set, depending on your vehicle and the price of metal. So we got a Rough Country 2-inch body lift that's going to accompany this full 4-inch kit we got here from Superlift, which we are a certified dealer for. Also, we've got Odro bumpers because he really likes the styling of those. The red, it's going away. We're going to color match those. Yeah, we do custom paint work. We're going to color match those to the white of the Jeep. EAG fender flares to cap everything off. Also, we got him a Red Rock snorkel. He not a big fan of the cold air intakes because really off-road, they do you no good whatsoever on a Jeep. They're more like a straw. It's going to suck up every bit of water that you go through. So snorkel is definitely the way to go if you're going to do some hardcore wheeling. Now that disassembly of the rear is completed, we can go back with the reassembly of the rear. We're going to break this down in 3 parts. We're going to do the rear first,
the front second, and then we're going to tackle dropping the skid down and putting the shifter extension. This is a 6-speed manual Jeep. So we're going to go back with all the new parts with our Super Lift lift. Alright, so this is how your control arms are going to come in the box. So they're not going to have any of their bushings installed, so you'll have to install your bushings. Just a 3-piece. So you've got each bushing side, also your metal sleeve that's going to go in the middle. It's going to tie your bushings together, but it's always a good practice to go ahead and grease these as you're putting them in. We use Lucas heavy duty grease. It's really good for everything. It's more of a just, you know, set it and forget it grease. Works out really good in this application. So we just grease this up, push it in. We're going to do the same thing for the other side. Of course, there are going to be 4 control arms for this lift kit. Okay, they always go flush. Now you can grease your bushing. Don't have to cake it up, because most of this stuff's going to be slid out the side anyway. You just want to be able to slide it down in there. There it is. It's on both sides. Then you have your grease fitting. I always put just a little bit of grease on the threads. Dry threads into this with the powder coat. Obviously it's going to be a little hard to get started. You want to make sure you're as straight as possible when you start. It's going to be an 8mm wrench. You want to put your grease fitting in, and you want to get it tight, but you don't want to go too tight because you can break these off very, very easily. You just want to make sure you can get it seated. That way it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's going to help grease that bushing. That's going to be the life of all your bushings. Alright, I'm going to turn it around. Here's our other bushing half. I'll do the exact same thing. Like I said, you don't have to grease it to death. This is just to make everything go a lot easier when you're trying to push it together. Your other grease fitting. Put a little grease on the threads. Get it started as straight as you can. Just keep in mind when you do this, you do encounter a little trouble trying to get that started just because of the powder coating built up in the threads. Just really want to take your time. You do not want to cross thread these because you can break them very easily, as I said earlier. So that one started. You'll get that as tight as you can. Don't over tighten it because it will break. Alright, and that is your completed control arm. Obviously we'll wipe it off before we install it in the vehicle. We'll do that 3 more times. We'll be ready to put the control arms in. Now we're going to go ahead and start the installation of the new parts for this lift kit. So we'll start out with the lower control arms. If you'll notice, this grease fitting is pointing down. That way you can still get to it to be greased. Of course, this one is our straight. That's going to go in the bottom. So that goes through. Put your nut on. It's a lot easier to go ahead and get both of these in here because you'll have to get them lined up. Lightly tap this in the place while Dustin drops wrenches. Other side. Tap the bolt through. Yeah, that worked out real well. Yeah, sorry. You're doing this. Of course, we have a lift. It's also, you're able to do it on the ground, but it's just a little bit more difficult. No, give me that. Get started. Go right through. This is a 750 foot-pound gun, but we will go back and retorque all this after the install is completed. Now we're going to go over the rear sway bar links of your Superlift 4-inch suspension kit. These are the rear sway bar links. They come just like that. You've got your bushings that go in it. We're going to lightly grease these bushings because it'll make it go in a lot easier. Push it in, it's good to go. Get the other side. That's completed. Some applications will have sleeves, metal sleeves that go inside of these bushings. The only thing with this kit, this particular kit, it just utilizes the rubber bushing that goes in there. There's no need for a sleeve because the bolts are actually a heavy shoulder bolt. Alright, in this step of our installation, this comes with a cam bolt for your upper control arm, which is it's an alignment tool for this lift kit. So when you need just a little bit more pinion angle, this is how you achieve that. It's a bolt with a flat place in it, and you've got an offset washer that's got a keyed flat place. So this bolt cannot turn in this without turning this. That makes it a cam bolt. That cam bolt is going to ride between these two ridges in this upper control arm mount on your axle. There's little perforated tabs in here from the factory for this particular installation. So these little perforated tabs will have to have a punch and a hammer to knock this out on both sides. Alright, so right here we've got our cam bolt installed, but it's not fully torqued down. That will be, there is a torque spec for that. That'll be torqued after we get the coil spring in. It's always easier to get the coil springs in without the track bar in it, because we still have a track bar relocation bracket that has to be installed on the axle. It's going to utilize the factory track bar, but it's going to relocate it up and over to align the axle back underneath the frame. So we'll go ahead and put our coil spring in. Alright, now that our rear coil springs are in, it's time to do the track bar relocation bracket, which is going to look like this. You're going to have to drill out these factory holes to a 5/16. And we're going to take this bracket and we're going to put it right over top of the factory track bar mount. So you want to make sure that one is lined up, because that's the most crucial part of this. Stick your bolt through. as my assistant, aka Dustin, decided to tell me as I was fighting with this bolt, I actually have this. It's called the Handy Clamp. I bought this off Amazon. It's $10. If you're a gearhead, you understand it's really hard to hold different fasteners in very, very tight places. Thank you.
There you go.
On there. Okay. Alright, so now that you got your rear track bar in and your relocation bracket on, both of those bolts get torqued down to the proper specs. Also, it'd be a good time to go ahead and put your proper torque specs on your upper control arm bolts, and then we'll finish everything up on the rear installation with the rear shocks. So with these shocks, we always stick our bolts back up in there. It just makes it a lot easier. You can hang the shock on one bolt and position your other bolt in there. You're going to pop the wire on that. Take that off. It's going to extend on down to your shock mount. If you don't have one of these, if you are using a lift, I highly recommend that you get some of these stands. You can get them at Harbor Freight. They're not too pricey. They're actually a really good deal, and they're very, very good to have if you want to do things safely. So this completes the installation of this rear shock. These are the house brand shadow shocks that come with the Super Lift 4-inch lift. You can get them with Bilstein or Fox. It is an upgrade. It is a little bit higher price. But these are the shadow shocks. That completes the rear installation of this lift kit. We're going to move to the front and go ahead and start our disassembly. Now we're ready to go ahead and start pulling this Skyjacker 4-inch lift out from under this Jeep. We're going to go ahead and take care of going and pulling all this out. Shouldn't have to do many modifications because it's already got a 4-inch lift. It's going right back with a 4-inch lift. So let's get started. Now that we got everything pulled out, now we can go back with all the new stuff. At this point, you want to make sure that you install your new bump stop. They just pop right in really easy, minimal force. So usually it's better to use a coil spring compression tool, but if you don't have one at your disposal, you can always remove the lower control arms, because usually when you're putting a lift on, they're getting replaced anyway. Leave your uppers because they need to hold your axle. Also, you're going to want to remove your track bar, and that lets the axle come down where it needs to go. And your coil spring should go in. Coil spring's in. Turn it to make sure it sits in the seat. And then lift your axle back up, and we'll move to putting the lower control arms back in. So now that the front installation is done, we've got our new coil springs in, our new shocks, new control arms. There's a couple of key things you want to make sure that you do whenever you're doing the front installation of this lift kit. There's big washers inside these notches right here on your lower control arm mount. That is actually to align the axle to give you the correct pinion angle. These washers are just centered up. They're not cam bolts like the rear bolts that we installed with the lift kit. This is a factory bolt and washer. You just want to make sure that you get that aligned in there before you tighten everything down. Also, you want to really make sure that when you're trying to get your coil spring in, like we addressed earlier, that you have everything unhooked, but you want to make sure you get everything put back in. We've got our steering stabilizer back in. This is a Rubicon. We kept the original sway bar disconnect. Go back, make sure everything is torqued after we get done with the install. We've already done that. We've already torqued everything, greased everything, We have our grease fittings and our lower control arms. They assemble just like the rear. Go through, make sure all your steering components have a cotter pin in them, because you definitely don't want that coming loose on you. Now that that's complete, we can move on to the transmission drop bracket. Alright, so now that we got our drop bracket on, keep in mind this has a 2-inch body lift and a 4-inch suspension. So this is your first drop bracket that's going to go for your suspension lift, and this is your second drop bracket to go for your body lift. And this is the factory hole location, so you can see how far we dropped it down. What we'll do is we'll make sure that everything is adjusted to where your 4-wheel drive handle seats all the way down in its resting place in 2-wheel drive, and then make sure it shifts into 4 high, 4 low, and then back into 2-wheel drive. This rod might need to be adjusted, but if that's the case, we can address that once we get it set back down on the ground. Alright, so what we're doing here is we're going to install this provided shift extension. It's for a manual shifter. So you want to start by removing the Torx bolt that bolts the factory shifter in. Make sure you don't drop it down in there. Alright, and you're going to pull the shifter out of the housing. It's going to look like this. Okay. So now what you're going to do, you're going to put this back in here. So this is made just like the shifter is made. So now that you have it down and your set screw down here on the side is put in, you're going to go ahead and tighten down your factory bolt. It's going to go on just like that. Your new supplied bolt. You'll push your factory boot back down to cap that off. Before you put your boot back in, you want to make sure you shift through all the gears. So now that the shifter is done, we're going to go ahead, before we do the body lift, we're going to go ahead and remove the front bumper, winch, rear bumper, and the Smittybilt tube steps to go ahead and get those out of our way. So when we go up at the body lift, we're actually going to install his new rock sliders because they are bolted on with the body lift.